actually. It says we are going live and that this Hangout on air is live, April 20th, 2015. It's 8:43 a.m. Las Vegas, 5:43 Knysna, and 10:43 Minneapolis, St. Paul. So we're crossing the Atlantic, folks. This is great. I'm Ron Motter, host of Planeta.com, now in its 20th year online, the World Wide Web, and with good friends in South Africa and the U.S., and we're chatting all about responsible travel and wildlife conservation. So greetings, everyone. Can you tell us the big news, Greg and Martin? Can you tell us what happened in Cape Town last week?
We went out for coffee. That was about exciting.
I think the bottom line is that Martin, as he said earlier, he said that you know, the whole responsible tourism discussion needs another gear and it needs another relook, and that seems to be echoed by a number of people.
Well, just to answer a little bit more fully, Deborah, we attended World Travel Market Africa together, and it's one of the international trade shows that they have in Cape Town. We live about 500 kilometers to the east of Cape Town. We both live in the same town. We work together occasionally. And I also attended, you were there for a short while as well, the Responsible Tourism in Destinations Conference, which was organized by the City of Cape Town and the WTM Africa people and a couple of others. The conference went on for 2 days, and it culminated in the Africa Responsible Tourism Awards, which I have to admit I completely forgot to attend the ceremony, and I feel very guilty about that. But some of our good friends won awards, and what Greg is referring to is I came away quite depressed because we don't seem to have progressed anywhere since the Responsible Tourism and Destinations Conference that Ron attended in South Africa 5 years ago. I think we were talking about the same things. We haven't moved forward.
Greg,
your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that, Ron, you over the last 3 weeks that I've certainly been on this Hangout, we've echoed and expressed our thoughts on the subject, and we've basically we've been challenging we've been challenging concepts within responsible travel and conservation, specifically conservation tourism. And I'm not hearing and I'm not witnessing, even at WTM, I'm not seeing a standard of discussion and language that comprehends what we should be dealing with. Again, I feel probably in South Africa, it could be the case, but 80% of people in tourism in South Africa haven't actually attended the course that they don't teach. Now, that goes back to the last discussion that Martin and I had, where we are basically saying we need to create an academy that teaches what we're moaning about. Otherwise, it's never going to happen. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. Yeah, the shorthand for that, Deborah and viewers, Martin and Greg have been talking about the School of Tourism and basically all the things they don't teach you.
Yeah, and do you have some school or organization that you're thinking of having this kind of offer or this kind of program? Do you have something in mind already established?
Yes, Martin and I have been planning it for some time now.
Mm. And where would it be?
It will be in Knysna. It's experiential and an experiential academic space. And yeah, we've been talking about it for some time, and basically putting the basic gears and broad concepts together. And we'll be able to update this platform as we develop.
Can both of you talk? Sorry, Deb, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, fantastic. We're going to be able to learn a lot from this that can apply here in the U.S. We're just only having the first discussions, inviting different groups to have these discussions with us in May here. And the USA is way behind South Africa just in concept of responsible tourism. So I'm going to look forward to learning from you and just hearing about your being able to create responsible tourism policy in South Africa, but then how does that really get applied in your, I guess, frustration with how that is really in the real world, and then coming up with identifying the need for education and how do you do that? Education is really important to us here, and so I'm really excited to be in these discussions, especially at this point right now with you, and just really excited to hear what you're doing and what you've learned. Your lessons learned are really applicable here right now.
Ron, what Deborah is asking, if I may, leads me into exactly what I was saying in the green room before we started. Deborah, I'm very proud to be a member of a nation that is the only country in the world that has responsible travel in its national legislation.
Yeah.
However, I came away from this last week quite depressed because we have really got great strategies and wonderful policies in place. I had a meeting, though, with the provincial destination investment body that provides information and promotes investment and tourism in our province, which is the province, the largest city in the province is the city of Cape Town. I had a discussion with the head of their film unit, and she filled me in on film as it is played in South Africa, how it's done, the national and international, the international treaties that we have with countries like Japan, Germany, and how these treaties provide benefits to filmmakers in both countries. The normal stuff. What she didn't realize that she was telling me was she was also telling me about the amazing depth of development that's being done, human resources development that's being done. In South Africa, we have an enormous equality problem, as you're probably aware, and an education problem, which is just sort of seemed to have got worse and worse since 1994, our transition to democracy rather than better and better. But the film industry has taken the idea of transformation and of development on board. They are doing an incredible job of mentoring, upskilling, training, and providing opportunities for people who have almost no other chance in life, but become these fantastically talented and gifted and technically competent, more than competent people in the film industry. The reason I got so depressed is because I believe that tourism does nothing more than pay lip service to all that sort of stuff. We are touted as being one of the most important sectors in the country because we produce 8% of the national GDP. Hundreds of thousands of people are employed. But the thing is that those hundreds of thousands of people, most of them don't even get any further than being a waiter.
Right.
And it's very, very depressing. And the problem is not government. The problem is the sector. My opinion is the problem is the sector, not the government. Greg, would you agree?
Yeah, well, Martin, just to feed into that, because it amazed me that Deborah said that they are behind, and if you've highlighted that we've got legislation that is progressive, but to live the legislation, we're lagging in that domain. And I think it goes back to what you and I have been saying all along. We need the relevant courses to teach people the detail that they are not being taught. Now, we always come back to this. As you witnessed me having a conversation with the one gentleman from the local economic development section, where I said to him, if he said that they would possibly not put any more money into tourism from a government perspective, and I said to him in that particular area, the relevant area that he was talking about, you haven't been putting money in, so you will never know what it's like. You know, if you don't know what you're not doing, how will you know what difference it will make if you don't put anything in that you weren't putting in the first place? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, after 3 weeks of talking to you, yes.
he had illusions about the fact that they were being effective. And I told him, I said, you haven't been doing anything. Today, I spent all of 3 to 4 hours giving examples to specific officials around where they are not doing anything. And I highlighted specific assets that are government owned that haven't been touched for 20 years. And the opportunity, no one will know what opportunity is being lost if they cannot see the opportunity that can be gained from responsible tourism being geared up and leveraged off the asset I'm talking about, or the assets. So, you know, it's an interesting for me, Deborah, to hear what you said. But for us to get to the next space, I believe we in South Africa have to take certain case studies and utilize those case studies in an open classroom dynamic that can teach other tourism people how you can leverage those opportunities.
Can you give me a couple of examples? You said today you'd been giving examples for 3 or 4 hours, meeting with people about how responsible tourism policies and activity are not being used. Can you share some of those examples? I would like to hear those, how you were describing those.
Well, and I'd like Martin to act as devil's advocate here, but if we look at the reference and what is being touted, and bear in mind, Martin and I have always said there are certain good projects. I think that we've got very, very high standards, and we're wanting the benchmark to trickle down and filter into places where it should be. So let's take a few examples, Martin. You can chuck in when you want there, because there are projects that are conservation orientated, there are projects that are human sort of social orientated, and then there are general opportunities, because the word responsible tourism in South Africa feeds into our affirmative action policy as well. Would you agree on that, Martin?
Yes. Yeah, it's very important. Not just feeds in, but it's a very important part of our.
Yeah. So we've got to create opportunities for historically disadvantaged people. What I'm seeing a lot of greenwashing, where you've got projects that already have got money, that have got big investors, And those big investors, you can't go wrong. It's easy to be good when you've got money and when you've got everything going for you. But to create something from nothing requires an entrepreneurial skill. It requires collaboration at all different levels. Now, Deborah, I know you asked for an example. And I'm basically trying to win some time to think here, because if I give the examples that I'm dealing with, I could get into a lot of trouble because I don't want to compromise. But let's use a project that I was involved in between 1995 and 1999. And in 2000, that project won a Tourism for Tomorrow award. It won 2 Green Trust awards, and it won a Raptor award. And that was what we called the whale route. And it involved whale tourism. Now, before we introduced the concept of a whale route, our legislation basically restricted boat-based whale watching. You were not allowed to advertise to take people out to watch whales on a boat. And we were one of through an education program, we created a committee that had scientists and researchers on board. It had tourism structures, regional structures, and provincial structures, and it had people from the private sector. And the exercise began, first of all, with an education program saying, did you know that whale tourism generates, and this was in 1994-95, whale watching generated at the time $504 million US, of which 0.5% of that was shared by Asia and Africa together. We embarked on this education program teaching each town that was on a coastline and that had high points to view and had decent ports to go out and watch whales by boat. We began discussions telling them about the opportunity that was available to them. We then progressed and lobbied with the Marine and Coastal Management. That would be the equivalent of your fisheries. I don't know what your department's called. I know it's got fisheries in it, and fisheries and wildlife. And we lobbied to the point where they changed the legislation, but it was very, very, very tightly controlled. We only issued 1 permit per area at the time, and those areas were designated. In other words, where you could go with your boat was restricted. We then altered another set of legislation that was within the guiding area, writing the modules for what we called a community guide, a local guide, a guide that knew the local knowledge, the local geography, the local sea conditions, and we set about defining a code of conduct for boat-based whale watching operators, and then we trained them. So we literally created the industry from scratch, from nothing. And within the first 4 years, by 1998, I4's research showed and highlighted the fact that we had become one of the 5th fastest growing whale watching destinations in the world. Now, if you go and measure the growth, when at this world travel market, it was amazing to go and see people that were now running very, very successful operations, but in 1995 we're sitting there wide-eyed looking at this opportunity saying, oh, this is great. Now, to me, that's a good example of responsible tourism products that educate, they create an educational basis, they communicate a conservation message, and their footprint is very light and it's very non-invasive. And if we compare that to, and if you look at the economic benefit to the area, it's massive. And again, it's still very, very well balanced. You don't have, like in many places in the US, you don't have boats with 100 people, hanging over the edges and 7 boats around a whale, because we still can only have 1 boat per area. So the footprint and the invasive and the invasion on the actual species is restricted. Very, very strict rules. So then if you compare that to the concept of walking with lions, which we have discussed in the past, and these lion petting, there's absolutely no, 100% zero conservation in walking with lions and the whole lion petting business. So there's just two contrasting exercises, and I can't understand why we're still grappling with those basic things in conservation. Why, when the world sees South Africa as a wild place and where its natural heritage is benefited or is appreciated, why we are still putting or promoting and getting away with things like the lion petting and other animal petting places which literally are just, I mean, I can't express that. Now, I've used two examples there. The third example is going to be a very broad example. Many of our municipalities have got assets that are not being utilized, and where they've got massive potential. And if one has to look at what the film industry, as Martin has described, they've been very, very progressive and very aggressive and progressive in the way they have taken their industry forward in a responsible manner. And we are lagging hugely, but we're lagging because of the lack or the inability to convert those opportunities into responsible tourism examples.
Tourism is a sector that sticks with what it knows. We're still seeing the same old itineraries being sold simply because the big operators are too lazy to look for new ones. Tourism is a sector that's very, very comfortable with itself, and it should not be. Tourism is also a sector that thinks it's a special needs child. Look after us particularly well, because we look after your international visitors. But the thing is that international visitors aren't forced to come here. They come here by choice. And by producing the kind of products like Coffee Beans Roots, Ron, your friends, they won one of the WTM Responsible Tourism in Africa Awards on Thursday. Producing those genuine experiences of meeting people, meeting the environment on the level that Greg is talking about with the whales. I mean, whale tourism was the only major disruption in tourism in the last 20 years. Now we need to change that.
Let me ask you one specific question. Let me ask you one specific question going back to that Cape Town conference. Was there any discussion of wildlife travel and conservation?
I have to make a terrible confession here. I missed a good half of the conference because I was so bored that I went and played elsewhere. I went down to the exhibition hall and met friends and met clients, and I didn't attend all the events. But I have put up a couple of the conference events that I did attend. I filmed them because they couldn't get together to do live streaming, although they were filming it. And I've given you in the group chat the links to those things, and I'll place them in what John Green calls the doobly-doo later. And here comes the cat.
Oh, very good. Hey there, kitty cat.
So I don't know, Ron, to be honest, but I didn't hear anything while I was there.
Greg, did you hear anything?
No, you know, I didn't really focus on it that much, and the majority of the rhetoric is focused, I would say, on the developed products, and then there are, as Martin has said, there are some gems. I think that it's not all doom and gloom. It's just that Martin and I are very critical of where we could be. There's a massive lag in the action that is led by progressive legislation. But Martin, I think you should cite the one comment that you said you were encouraged by, the comment on responsible tourism and responsible actions versus sustainable tourism and sustainable actions, as quoted by one of the ladies. Am I catching you off guard?
You are catching me off guard because I don't remember. I know. I know exactly
in other words, the journey. The one is the journey.
Nombulelo Mkefa, who is in charge of responsible tourism at the City of Cape Town. She's one of the speakers whose presentations I filmed, and I've given you the link there in the group chat. It's on my YouTube channel, and she gave us a presentation where tourism, the City of Cape Town is in implementing responsible tourism. Nombulelo said to me, because we were having this discussion about responsible tourism versus sustainable tourism, and I am of the opinion that sustainable tourism is greenwashing. You can't achieve it until we can achieve a sustainable transport model, and we can't achieve a sustainable transport model for a while still. But Nombulelo made a very, very clever point. She said to me, no, not 100% right, because sustainable tourism is the destination. Responsible travel is the journey. And I think that was one of the cleverest things that anybody has said to me about tourism and responsible tourism. Sustainable tourism doesn't happen, but it is the destination. You know, if you can dream it and you can get there. So that's what we've got to dream about. We've got to hold on to that dream. The other point that that came out of my discussion with her, and here's my notes from my official Cape Town International Convention Centre pad. If you only ever read the books you've written yourself, you'll never learn anything. Tourism needs to start looking outwards, else we'll be repeating this talk shop in 2215, as we're doing now, and we did in 2010. Tourism needs to stop being a special needs child, and that comment from Nombulelo is a beautiful way of looking at how do we stop being a special needs child. We have a dream. Now, how do we implement it? The implementation of that dream is responsible travel. Now, how do we get the big guys to do that and not to greenwash it? The examples of greenwashing are just so prolific. Sorry, I'm off my.
I want to focus you both a bit on the wildlife because I pulled in Deborah last week, and we talked about everything except for wildlife conservation. But it is one of these topics in the responsible travel sector that seems to be kind of a latecomer to the party. Deborah just kind of discovered the discussions that happened last year with the TBEX conference in Cancun, of which there was a big controversy of whether or not the conference should encourage participants to go to a dolphin encounter where the dolphins are in captivity and you get to pet them and pose for photos with them. And the tricky thing here is that for the most part, when we talk about responsible travel, we don't talk about wildlife, and we don't talk about the conservation of the flora and the fauna. That seems to be on the outs of responsible travel. So I'm very pleased to hear you folks address this and to say that we could be doing so much more.
Well, if I can just come in there.
Sorry, Greg. Can I just, because I'm burning, a second section of my discussion with Nombulelo, which I've just put on the group chat, is that the problem is that responsible tourism's definition excludes wildlife, because the definition that people are using, if you look at Harold Goodwin's keynote address, responsible tourism is creating better places for people to live in and better places for people to visit. Those two words for people have to be taken out of the destination, out of the definition. Once that's done, we can be inclusive of the environment, and that was the problem with the other problem with the conference. That's why we didn't hear anything about wildlife and the environment.
Okay, so Ron, now I'm starting to burn because up till now, since you've been meeting us, Martin and I have always agreed with each other. But I'm gonna throw a spanner amongst the works here. Is a hunter that comes from the States to South Africa to hunt a species, is he a tourist?
Certainly.
And is there such thing as responsible hunting?
Good question. And I would say yes.
Okay, so I read for about the 20th time a book called A Game Warden's Report, who cites an example in America of a group of hunters, specifically a specific club that focused on a specific species of duck, and that duck was being eradicated and threatened to the brink of extinction, a migrating species in the States. I would need at the next hangout, I'll bring you the details of it. But this club, this club that had many chapters that spread across your coastline, basically this club, through education and through a process of educating farmers about the habitat that they shouldn't destroy, revived the species and got the numbers back up to where they were. And that there is a whole concept of responsible tourism or responsible hunting, and those hunters are tourists. So we've got the worst examples of the canned lion hunting, which is actually being fed by tourists, because the guy who's breeding the lion is effectively selling that lion on to being hunted. Whether it's hunted responsibly or not is a question. On the other side of that scenario, you've got hunters who I know personally hunting in Central Africa, and it's those hunters that are actually stopping the poaching of big game like lion, but more so your elephant and your rhino. So I now come back to language and comprehension of the concept of responsible travel and responsible or conservation tourism. If we do not peg the language, and if we don't get people to comprehend the concepts, we will never get to the space which we're striving to achieve in responsible tourism.
All good points.
Greg,
wait one second, Martin. But all good points. And the question that I would pose is, why is this not a topic then up for discussion at these responsible tourism events or at any tourism conference? Are we and again, I think I know the answer, but are we so afraid of debate and controversy? To me, that would be a wonderful discussion. What are the pros and cons of hunting? Why is that not discussed? Canned lion hunting, why is that still not on the table for these tourism conferences in South Africa? We're just ignoring the topic?
I want to disagree with Greg about the fact that I disagree with him, because I actually agree with you. I just personally can't hunt. I have tried, and I have a spectacular failure at it. And as a result of that, I don't. But it's not about me. I'm not against somebody who hunts in an ethical way, in correct, with the principles of sustainability. I know I'm going back to that word, but we do know that there is such a thing as carrying capacity. Natural environments have been reduced, and if you have too many antelope on the veld, you're going to have overgrazing just as much as if you have too many cattle on the veld. But It's the way and it's done. It's why it's done. These are important questions, and where I think we can take lessons, although she's not directly addressed this question, as far as I know, is from Anna Pollock and her papers and her work on conscious tourism. If you know what you're doing and why you're doing it, and if there's a grand plan that you're working towards, there shouldn't be a problem with ethical hunting. And I put it in parentheses because not everybody's going to agree with it. But I don't say that people mustn't hunt.
Okay,
I think the way it's done. And sorry, the last point. Ron's question about why aren't we talking about this? I think it's because it's a scary topic, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier. Rather, let's just refresh and rehash the same crap we've been doing for the last 10 years, 20 years. It needs to be discussed, and by the same token, you know, as something like, you know, open discussion about sex education or drug education or that sort of thing. If you suppress that, you're going to increase the problems of the addict. And if you suppress the question Ron is asking, you're going to suppress the problem.
I want to just add, Ron, you said, why are we having the discussions in South Africa? Why aren't we having the discussions in Europe and in the States? Because it's the people from the States and Europe who are basically. Stop smoking, Ron. It's the people in the States. It's the people in the States and it's the people in Europe who are buying the tickets to, number one, firstly, to go and pet the lion. Number two, to volunteer at a place where they pet lions. Number three, to basically, and Martin, this is one pretty much that I think I've discussed with you before, to go on so-called research projects where the people are basically not actually volunteering, but they're actually replacing the work opportunities of local people. And you know, there's just three quick examples of the just the smoke screen that's put up. But we must either somehow, the conversation must not only take place, it's the people coming in that have to be educated. Who's having that conversation? And I'm amazed at people who constantly, from the universities in Europe, that think conservation is about saving animals. I think that first world countries are not growing conservationists, they're growing animal rightists that have lost the plot when it comes to what conservation is.
There's a double-page spread in a really expensive brochure for a conservation experience at a massive nature reserve, private nature reserve, about 300 kilometers east of where we live, in the Eastern Cape. This is in a youth travel catalogue. The people who should be answering these questions are as much us as the Animal Planets and the National Geographics. Because I believe that, Greg, those channels are setting the bar in a direction that it shouldn't be set. Not up or down, but where it shouldn't be at all. They're creating animal lovers rather than people who understand the ethics of conservation and how we as a species should be interacting with our environment. The discussion needs to be taken, as I said earlier with my note here, it needs to be taken outside of tourism. It needs to go beyond tourism, because the National Geographics and the Animal Planets of this world make it seem like this youth tourism thing is great, like the petting lion thing is great. There's a lot of they need to examine their principles and their ethics, I think, and they need to engage with people in the countries to find out whether what they're doing is ethical.
You know, I'd like to make this into a segue, a nice segue to the work that Deborah and I are doing right now. In May 2015, we're hosting an online discussion about responsible local travel. You know, it goes back to the language, Greg, and you're right. I don't think we have the proper language. We don't really talk about responsible travel in the U.S. outside of certain classrooms or certain conferences, but we do talk about local travel, and we do talk about, you know, even the misnomer of travel like a local, which Robert Reed just made a wonderful video on YouTube about, that Greg was promoting from Transitions Abroad. But Deborah and I have this idea. We don't have our language down just yet, but for Deborah and myself, that's just fine. So we're going to be looking at indigenous tourism, food tourism, wildlife and wilderness and park travel, and using the U.S. as kind of as the area of focus in the month of May for these discussions. We'll be doing Twitter questions on Mondays and Hangouts on Fridays. But I would agree entirely with you, Greg, that this has to be discussed in the U.S. And I'll ask a very innocent question, but you know, where do we, you know, at what events is South Africa and Southern Africa promoted? You know, here in the U.S., you know, again, it's still a world away. We're just not hearing about, you know, Africa unless it's a crisis. And you know, it's not just Africa; that's how we treat Mexico as well, or Asia, or Canada, or Europe. You know, we're terrible. We're terrible at looking outside the world. Deborah?
Dear America, the world.
Yeah, we selected to examine the U.S. and our discussions and topic are responsible local travel in the USA. That's the focus, and there we see opportunity because here we have a lot of things kind of coming up at the grassroots. We have the local food focus and movement now. In fact, Minnesota is a leader in that, in food co-ops, local food, slow food, as you know. We also see a growing sharing economy that there's a lot of it is focused on tourism and travel, Airbnb, cars, you know, all kinds of things. We see the buy local, independent business, buy local campaigns. That is a national effort now. There are national organizations working with independent businesses in their states and across the U.S. to promote education about why it's important to buy local, how that money stays in your economy, you know, instead of going to shareholders somewhere else. There's a lot of these native and indigenous tourism looking at building better cultural guidelines around tourism and travel, and you can look at Hawaii as an example of a state in the U.S. where the native people have had a tremendous impact, mainly negative from tourism. So what Ron and I are looking at is an opportunity to bring those kinds of groups together in the U.S. And not all of them recognize that they're part of the tourism and travel industry. You know, sometimes a small shop may not realize. And our goal is to simply discuss what would responsible local travel be in the U.S. and how might our singular messages become stronger when we combine them. You know, the local foods and the local buy local campaigns certainly have a lot in common because they want people to invest and make a community better, and people have healthier food. So we're taking this opportunity to reach out to those sectors and bring them together and look at what people are doing in those sectors and how does that kind of fall under the responsible tourism umbrella. Where can we leverage our individual movements together to create a bigger impact with educating the public, sharing information between ourselves, and how we can learn from good examples as well, you know, what different groups are doing here. But also to, Ron and I have noticed this for so many years, there is a lot of organizations from the United States that are based here that supposedly do ecotourism, sustainable tourism, some kind of travel-related development that, you know, they have this expertise. So they are going to other countries to extend and teach about and train and implement these different programs about tourism and travel. Yet they don't do any work here in the U.S. There's very few of them that actually do substantial work in the United States. So in some ways we want to challenge that and understand why the U.S. is behind on even talking about responsible travel in the world. It's not a term that's common or really understood here much at all. So any advice you might have for sort of educating the grassroots communities and movements that we are trying to bring together, since you have done some of this before, I would love to hear more about that.
I have a proposal.
Please.
I think that it all comes down to a balance between altruism and then profit. And in South Africa, we have incentives, maybe not so much incentives, but more pressure. Our affirmative action legislation basically pushes for responsible travel within the social platform or dynamic. That's why, probably, as Martin said, responsible travel within the conservation arena is not upheld as best as possible. But here's my proposal. Why don't we try and initiate an example? You take a dynamic of, let's say, cultural tourism, bring them out to South Africa where you want to make a difference. We will get them exposed to parallel dynamics. It might be a minority group, it might be a specific culture, it might be whatever the example might be. We'll find the match here. And we twin them. It'll be a good example in South Africa. And we twin them and take them through the language and the ability of how. And then let's see if it works.
In my day, we used to have pen pals. And you used to write to your pen pal in the other country, and he would write back to you, or she would write back to you, and you would share your experiences of being a school child in your countries. We should look at that example and start, because we've got the net today. We can do it face to face today, like we couldn't do it in my day. But maybe the idea of a delegation or a tour or that sort of thing is awesome. Maybe we can start on a smaller scale. Maybe we can start right here with the Hangouts by getting together people like the people at Coffee Beans Roots together with people who are trying to do community-based tourism in a country, in a town somewhere near one of you.
Well, I love that idea. I love that idea to both of you. And the question I have is, again, it's digital literacy, and how do we bring people up to speed on using Facebook, using a Google Hangout, using Flickr, whatever your choice is, whatever we can get people to do. Because for the most part, you know, again, reflecting on what Deborah was saying, you know, a lot of people, they don't see themselves connected to travel and tourism. You know, we are, you know, we are a small community museum. Well, again, who do you depend on visiting? Or where do you get your income stream? Well, from visitors, but that's not tourism. That, you know, tourism. We still lack the language around the world and in this country, in the U.S., of understanding how we fit into that tourism and travel sector. Which is why, you know, it's going to be very important in May. The 2nd to the 10th is this elongated week called the National Travel and Tourism Week. You know, that was kind of one of the inspirations that helped kick off the idea for Deborah and myself to host kind of an alternative parallel discussion, again, kind of a grassroots up approach of looking at these issues without necessarily defining them, and hopefully bring as many people in as possible. Can that then feed into what you're talking about? I'd say certainly. You know, can we identify some examples of cultural tourism? And I think there would be some really good, you know, people-to-people kind of contacts that could be mutually beneficial.
Ron, I had the privilege of going over to Taiwan. During my time developing the whale route, I was invited by the Taiwan Cetacean Society to go and learn about what they're doing. And then they, in turn, came to South Africa, and I took them to witness what we had set up. And it was quite amazing because the Taiwanese culture, 97% of their tourism is local. It's just local travel. And the culture is very, very, very different in so many senses, especially when it came to viewing wildlife in the ocean. And when they came to South Africa, I was able to impart value systems through interaction that enabled them to fully comprehend and understand the dynamic at play, and go back re-energized and vitalized. Just as I was when I went there were a whole lot of things that they were getting right that we just didn't get right. They did it naturally. And what was so interesting is the Polynesian side, the East Coast, was exercising the utilization of marine mammals in a responsible way, whereas the West Coast was actually still using the bycatch and quite open about applying for quotas to take marine mammals. But I come back to that experiencing and setting up the models, and this is where whenever I go to Europe and I lecture in Europe, I ask the people I'm lecturing with, I say, are you a conservationist? And they say, yeah, they are conservationists. And then some of the people say, no, I'm an animal rightist, and some of them say, no, I'm an animal welfareist. But I have a very, very good test for whether you are a conservationist. And it sorts people out very, very quickly. Because when you get to the concept of the Kruger National Park, and then you look at, say, in, I don't know, Martin, there could be a whole lot of other places we could choose, but I'm thinking particularly of, Martin, what's the area where Joyce Poole and Katie Payne work with elephants in Africa? Kenya. Specifically, what's that park called?
The Kenya Park with elephants.
Yeah, I'll think of the name.
Yeah.
It'll come to me. But they had a policy where, in the Kruger Park in 1990 up to 94, there was a policy of culling to reduce the numbers. And in conservation ethics discussions, I asked, do you agree with culling or not? But specifically elephants in specific dynamics. And the majority of people pretty much always say, no, we're against culling. And then I say to them, so you choose one species above many other species. And Ron, this highlights the example of us talking about the 50,000, the small 50,000 as opposed to the big 5. Because few people understand how elephants can decimate an area, a managed area, and wipe out many different species. Similarly, I ask and I highlight the point, when you see on the front page of the newspaper the story of a rhino having been poached, have you any idea how many other species have been taken out on that same day but don't reach the front page of the newspapers because of the fact that they are the small 50,000 and not one of the big 5?
Amboseli Elephant Research Project.
Amboseli National Park.
Yeah, that's the problem with the Cute and furries. They're big and sexy, and they only, icons don't. Just as Brad Pitt is not the same as every man on earth because he's particularly good looking. An icon like an elephant has the same position in the environmental hierarchy, but people don't think of the three of us as when they think about the typical male. They think about the guy who's clever enough to say that, I mean, look at me, I don't have a real job, I go to work in makeup. There's a huge problem, and it should be a red flag for responsible tourism in marketing icons like save the elephant, save the rhino. It's not to say that we mustn't save the elephants to save the rhino, but there's a whole ecosystem that supports those animals, and they support ecosystems in turn.
True story. True story. According to No Such Thing as a Fish, do you know why World Wildlife Fund chose the panda as its icon, as its logo?
I've heard this before.
Easy to draw in black and white.
You could. It's in black and white, so you could on black and white posters it comes out fine.
Okay.
Hey, final comments, and we'll wrap this up. And stay online, and but anything else you'd like to say today?
Just
give the floor to Deborah.
Yeah, she's spoken too much today already.
Yeah.
I'm just sharing some links over on the side there, and I'd really like to invite you to sit in on the Google Hangouts on Fridays in May. They're set up where we're going to have about 3 featured guests for discussion that will speak as much as they can in 5 minutes about their work and their how it relates to responsible travel in the U.S. So we're trying to showcase some of the best ones and then link them. And I think if you could join us, you can provide a good analysis of what you see that we're doing here, what we're doing right, and what our challenges are, and perhaps where we could cooperate further with you. And then there is about a 10-minute survey. If you could take that sometime soon, that's helping us kind of figure out some of the questions we want to ask during the Hangouts. And I've put that link to both the Wiki Spaces, our wiki that we're developing on Local Travel USA, and also the Google form where the survey is. So if you guys could check those out and listen in, send in your questions or suggestions during that time, that would be very valuable to us. And then finally, I've listed a link there to the Rethinking Tourism and Eco-Travel book that Ron referred to earlier, just an FYI. But it's been really helpful and enjoyable meeting both of you and learning more about how responsible tourism is or isn't working in South Africa, sharing some of your frustrations with us. And, you know, I want to continue this dialogue. I think it's so important that we're sharing, and I want to thank Ron for hosting these and teaching me how to use Google Hangouts. I'm still not really that familiar, but it is more accessible than us having to fly and spend that money to meet each other at this point. So I really want to say thanks to Ron for organizing this and just a beginning of my discussions with you. But I really look forward to this. So thank you very much.
Hey, Deborah, one technical request, and anyone else watching, if you can, copy the text that you put into our group chat and paste it into the event page so that everyone can see it. Otherwise, once this Hangout is over, anything that's in the group chat will disappear. And Martin, I've already taken your video links and I've added it to the event page. I mean, there's plenty of good reading and viewing.
I had copied it to a text document, so you saved me there. As a final point from my side, I think that the one thing that we should possibly take away from this evening's discussion is the importance of looking at the language that we use. I think when we go to the industry, which we shouldn't even call an industry, when we go to the sector and we talk about environment, we must start to identify those words that bring the blinds down across people's eyes. That's the kind of word. As soon as they hear environment, we need to talk about the landscape, the place where we live. We need to simplify it so that it is more in your face. I think we need to really, as communicators, need to think about that.
Thank you. Greg, any final comments?
Well, I've said a lot, and I think that, first of all, it was lovely to meet Deborah. Again, I echo her words to say thanks to you for the Hangout. And then lastly, just to echo Martin's words, until we comprehend and the concepts of responsible tourism, and until we can articulate them to the people that we're working with, I don't think they're going to translate as quickly as we want them to. So it comes down to how do we get the user taking the journey to choose responsible travel. I still maintain that economics is the driver, demand drives. And I still maintain that the more people traveling ask for responsible product, the more the product will strive to be responsible.
Well said, well said.
Exactly.
I think that those demands are shared by these different movements that are here in the U.S. and they're demanding better food, fair trade, products, you know, things like that. And so we just have to figure out that language in travel as well.
On a final note, I want to thank everybody for participating. This has been an enjoyable and quotable hangout. You know, I look upon this kind of as something that 20 years ago would have just been interviews and private conversations, and now it can be public and open access, and very good conversation. Last point I'm going to make is this. If you were here in Las Vegas, I would invite you to Discovery Park on Friday for Dogs and Drones. Dogs and Drones is our local meetup Friday afternoon afterward, 5 to 7 p.m. So please bring your dog, bring your drone. If you don't have a dog or drone, that's fine. Come anyway. It's just a pretext for a neighborly meeting. Let's use the words that people are using, and yeah, dogs. You can't take your cat for a walk. We'll have more about that.
You can
later.
bring the cat to Hangout. Mind you can bring the dog to Hangout too, I think.
Yeah, bring your cat.
My dog's in the Hangout.
We love them. We love them. Hey, thank you, everybody. Thank you for watching, everybody watching this. If you can, please, as I say, share the Hangout, share the video. Timestamp any notable comments that you'd like us to pay attention to for the participants. Yeah, please add those links to the Google event page and or to the YouTube video, so we'll flesh out those show notes, and we will continue this conversation. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.